Thank you all for coming on a Saturday morning, and especially when you had an event last week, so a lot of preparation for that. To listen to me about languages, and I think I'll leave you with the thought that you all know more than me, and by the time we finish this dialogue, because that's what I believe, that most people that I meet know a lot more than me, and it's just probably a reminder that they need a time. So Osama gave a long introduction about me, so I won't tell anything about myself, but I'll tell you two stories that really fascinate me every morning I get up. One story is about an 83-year-old woman from Nepal, and she was a nomad for half of her life until she got married, and her family moved inside the deep forests in western Nepal bordering India in a place called Dang. They went from place to place. They made lean-to houses by bringing two branches together and then covering that with leaves, layers after layers, to protect it from rainfall. And the environment didn't allow them to stay in one place for a long time, so they moved a lot of places. And their language was very oral. They didn't have a writing system to write their language. And but eventually, when a lot of things changed around, the members of the community got married in the mainstream society, and in that process, they lost their language, their culture, their festivals, and everything. So they were kind of a very minority community, and when they got assimilated in the majority community, they lost all of that. So almost all of them started to forget their language because the kids were not learning the language. They were being educated in Nepalese, which is the official language of the country, and there was just this woman, this 83-year-old woman. Interestingly, her name is Gyani Maya Sen, and as you know, Gyani means wisdom, and she actually is the wisdom herself, because she was the only living speaker of that language. She is still the only fluent living speaker of the language. And I was really honored and fortunate to make a documentary about her language called Kusunda through a friend. His name is Sanjeev Chaudhary, and Sanjeev wrote a blog on Global Voices that Osama mentioned, and I read that blog, and it was so fascinating that I thought, okay, if I ever get an opportunity to go there, I'll definitely go there, talk to her, and then record some of the wisdom that she has been carrying all these years. And until we finished the recording of 2 days, we didn't know that her sister, who was in India before, also speaks Kusunda. So she is the second living speaker of the Kusunda language. But imagine if the language died with her, and what would have been lost? The uniqueness that language carries, or that community carries, is all preserved in that language. You can't just translate all of that into a different language, because it's not just the language, it's not just the medium, it's also the emotion and everything that is preserved inside that language. And the second story is my own grandma's story. She grew up in British India in a small village in coastal northern Odisha, bordering to West Bengal. And back then, being part of that society where she grew up, it was patriarchal. So in the whole family, she was the only girl, and she was loved deeply by everyone because being the only girl. And she was so pampered that when she stepped into the school, and the school system was very different than it is right now, and she probably got some punishment from the teacher, and she said, "I'm not going to go to that school again," and she left going to the school at all. So she was illiterate, and when she got her first voter ID card, the officer asked her, "What's your name?" So she said, "My first name, my name by my father is this, and my mother calls me this, and my grandparents calls me Mouse." People called kids in weird names back then. So the electoral officer, looked at all the names and found Mouse to be the sanest name of all those three names, and wrote Musa, which means mouse, as her first name. And all her life she carried that one document which has a very funny, hilarious name, which is Mouse. And so I grew up. My whole childhood was with my I spent a lot of time with her. I got inspired from my food habits, from my belief, and everything else from my grandma, because my parents were both working. She was my sort of early teacher, and she was illiterate in the modern standards, the educational standards that we have. So her oral stories that she carried out were never recorded in any form, and she was not the only one. And we're not even from an indigenous community. We are the majority in that region, and her stories were never recorded, were never shared in the mainstream media, the literature or the movies. Anything never represented the people, and even today they don't represent the people, right? And that's the case of our country and the larger world, that the narratives that we get to see or we get to hear is a narrative of the majority of the people, or some people that are privileged, people who don't have access to education, or people don't contribute back to the knowledge commons, never get their share in that knowledge commons. So the knowledge commons is always very skewed. I worked with Wikipedia for a long time, and Wikipedia, the vision statement says by the founder Jimmy Wales that Wikipedia is supposed to be the sum of all knowledge, and in my understanding, it is a sum of some knowledge at this moment. It has a long way to go to become the sum of all knowledge, because right now 70% of Wikipedia's content is written by the developed world, and the developing world, which is actually the majority of the population in the entire world and has a long history, doesn't have a real representation on a platform like Wikipedia. And internet, if you look at the internet, was supposed to be democratic. It was supposed to represent all the people and not some people. But if you look at the internet and the knowledge commons in general, it is really skewed, right? So some of my work include, sort of revolve around the question, when we talk about knowledge, it's the knowledge of who are the contributor to that knowledge. Is it the knowledge of the people? Is it the knowledge of the people who are privileged, or the people who have access? Is the knowledge of the people who have been brought up in a particular environment and the representative of those people? Or is it the knowledge of all the people, and the very definition of knowledge is something else, right? So I want to stop here for a moment, and I shared these two stories, but you have many stories in your life, particularly around languages. So if you can volunteer and tell me what do you mean by a language. Don't tell me Hindi is a language, English is a language, but not the names of the language, but what do you mean as a definition of the language, or your understanding, not an academic definition, but what you think a language is. Anyone, any of you?
A medium of communication.
Okay. Yeah. And
We express ourselves, the way we express
the way you express yourself. Yeah, that's actually very close, the two definitions that you both gave. Anything else? Yeah.
Language is something what you want to say.
What you want to say?
You want to say, and you at the same time believe that he has got my sense. That is something.
Yeah. So that's sort of closer to what Arpana just said. Expressing your feelings or your emotions. Anything else?
Mutually understood coding system of communication.
Mutually understood coding system for communications. And you all gave really interesting definitions. And I think it's part of a community. A group of people have to communicate between themselves, and that's the reason they devised languages. And our society is evolved, and so they devised the writing system, the scripts, and that's the journey of a language, right? In some places people consider languages as mothers and whatnot, but I think the moment you do that, you also abandon the mother, send the mother back to the old age home. But I think it's important to consider language as a tool to communicate, to share emotions, to express, and so on, right? There are many languages in the world. Just make a wild guess how many languages are spoken in the world.
Must be about a couple of thousand.
Yeah, but any number? 50,000. Wow.
I think it should be more than that.
But just think of the languages, not the dialects, because each language has
Yeah.
10, 12 different dialects, right? As long as they're mutually intelligible, I think if we just stop there and think of that as a language, what do you think?
India
How,
itself has more than 200 languages?
actually, more than that.
More than that.
More than that. More than that. Much,
It is surviving.
yeah, much more than that.
Including indigenous languages.
Yeah,
and,
many more than that. I'll tell you the numbers though, but I still want to hear what you think. Just imagine for a moment what would be the number of the total, all the languages in the world, including indigenous languages, of course.
Yeah, I read somewhere, I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay, there are about 6,500 languages in the world that are distinct, not dialects, but distinct languages. They use definitions by linguists, basically, largely that kind of consensus. And just guess how many languages are in danger?
More than 60-70% of them would be in danger.
Yeah, you're closer. 50% of them are expected to die in a century's time. 50%, 2,400 something, 64 or something. And this is by UNESCO, so they use a lot of international standards, surveys, and that sort of methodologies to estimate that. And what we really lose when we lose a language, just think of that for a moment, right? We talked about the language being a tool for communications, for expressing yourself, a coding system to preserve a culture and so on, right? Knowledge sharing tool. So what do we really lose? Why can't we just stick to just one language, one country, one language, and we translate everything back to that language? Everyone learned that language in their schools. What's wrong with that?
Create a mall of language.
It create,
Mall. That's what you do now. In the urban system,
yeah,
you put up a mall,
yeah.
everybody goes to a mall, and the same brand you see everywhere in the world as soon as you go to a mall. So,
That's a very interesting way to put it.
so
Yeah,
you make us, I don't know, I mean, I think languages are origin of the humans themselves.
yeah,
And depending upon which region you are, which place you are, which geography you are, which culture you are and all that, it comes from there.
yeah,
So if you try to create one language system or a few language system, you actually trying to put people into one single bottle, one single curriculum, one single school, one single thought, and you try to kill the originality of those diversity.
yeah. Brilliant thing that Osama just said, right? When you try to confine everything into one system or one type of system, then you kill all the originality, all the nuances that each of those people have, right? We all look different. That means that we might have similarities. We are all human beings, we are all Homo sapiens, but we all have our own backgrounds, right? And all of those are sort of encoded in our languages. The moment we kill a language or the moment we allow a language to die, we kill all of that. And just imagine everyone speaking the same language is still okay to some level, but everyone doing the same thing exactly the same way, eating the same very food every morning, right? Celebrating the same festival in the same exact way. How boring that would be, right? And we don't want that. As humans, we love diversity. Because of diversity, we enjoy things, right? When we travel to a new place, what we enjoy really? The new environment, the new people, the food, and all of that. So if we make everything just look like one thing, then we miss out all of that. And in India, there were 780 languages that were identified by the People's Linguistic Survey of India, led by Ganesh Devi. He founded an institution called Bhasha, and they did a very elaborate survey. Almost 2,000 volunteers and their staff members. They went around, interviewed people, recorded all of that. It was probably the largest ever sort of survey that was done in the whole country. And they recorded the names of the languages, the details of the languages. They published volumes of books, and they also shared the fact that 250 languages have died in the last 50 years. So that's a really high rate of language death anywhere in the world. India is one of the very few regions in the world which is linguistically diverse. Not many places are left like that. Talk about human migration, talk about how different societies have been invaded and so on. A lot of places have been homogenized. US, for example, used to be the land of the Native Americans, and now you don't even find Native Americans speaking their own language because all those years of oppression that changed the whole demography of the region. But somehow India's languages survived all these years, right? And that's a good thing that so many languages survived, but it's also alarming that today so many languages are dying. And in the last 50 years, if 250 languages died, in the next 50 years we will lose many more languages because we're actually becoming much more homogeneous thanks to the internet, that we all sort of speak the same lingo, right? Cosmopolitans, for instance, there's just one language, English, or here in Delhi it would be Hindi. And that's sort of the situation that's expanding really fast. I live in Bangalore, and when I went there for the first time in 2006, it was a whole different city altogether. And today, if I look at the changes, it's drastic, it's huge. People are sort of becoming, they look like they're part of the same family. They all do the same thing, the same exact thing, maybe in a slightly different manner, but there's not much diversity left. And we're becoming more and more homogeneous like many other countries. And that's very alarming because if we look at the marginalized languages, the indigenous languages or the endangered languages, there are several factors that are sort of pushing those languages to die because people migrate from place to place. I myself moved to a different city for my education and for my job and so on, and I sort of settled down. And that could be the case of many of you, or at least many people that live in different cities. Political reasons as in when the government declares one language as the official language of that state or that country, then what happens to the rest of the languages, right? They don't have governance in their language. They don't even have the universal rights of human declaration. Is that what it's called? Yeah, that translated in their language, and some languages don't have scripts, or someone just mentioned about the oral languages, right? So they probably need a translation in an oral or a visual form if they don't have a script. And their civil rights, their vital information like healthcare are not even available in many languages. And when people don't have information available in their own language, they don't own the knowledge, right? Because their stories, their narratives are written by someone else. And just like history is written by the person who has, or by the people who have got the victory, and not the people who were oppressed for a long time, it's exactly the same. The human history is sort of the indication that when some people write the narratives, it's their narratives. They could be very unbiased, but the little bias that they might have will reflect in their narratives, and that impacts a lot. So knowledge commons, if you look at that, the contribution of marginalized communities are really less. India has more than 419 marginalized languages or indigenous languages or groups that speak diverse languages, and sometimes they have their own scripts as well. But only one language has a Wikipedia of its own, right? Wikipedia is available in more than 300 languages, 300 world languages, and only the Santali, Santali is the only indigenous language that has a Wikipedia of its own. From India. They recently, from South Asia actually, not just India. And they recently crossed 1,000 articles on Wikipedia. But think of a community that is spread in 3 different countries, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, with so many people. Santali is spoken by a sizable number of people, has only 1,000 articles online that are encyclopedic, right? That's really worrying. And I believe, this is my personal belief, and you might disagree with this, that media, independent media, is tied to power. And my understanding comes from part of the Western world, which sort of created their own independent media when they were becoming, when they are developing stage. And in that process, they told their stories, they sold their propaganda in such a manner for years that when we look at that, we get biased, right? I was reading a Quora post by someone who is an American and is married to who is a Tamil, and she has written there that people in India have a different perspective of the Americans, and we Americans are as human as you are. We have our value systems in the societies. We are nowhere close to how we are portrayed in our own Hollywood movies, right? So, but the moment we watch those Netflix shows or the movies, we get a very different perspective of the American society, and that's because media is really powerful. What you see, what you visualize, what you hear, gets imprinted in your mind, and you get a perception. You start seeing things with that lens every single moment that you experience something. When the indigenous communities or the marginalized communities don't have any control over the media, how they are portrayed, what stories are told about them in the media, they sort of become the commodities for the entertainment industry. And that happened for a lot of communities. In the western part of Odisha, I worked with a community called Bonda. They are divided into two different communities. One is called Upper Bonda and the other one is called Lower Bonda. The name is very literal. The Upper Bondas live up in the hill. It's difficult to climb up there. It took us almost half an hour to go 10 kilometers. And the Lower Bondas live in the plains, so they're more assimilated.
Half a day
Half an hour.
to go to 10 kilometers.
It's kind of very steep.
By
car.
vehicle. Oh.
The roads are really narrow. They're not even real roads, so you sort of make your own ways. And they generally walk up and down every day, even if they need things like salt or oil, because that's something that they don't have up there, right? They can grow vegetables, they have meat and so on, but they need to still come down to buy their commodities, the grocery. When I was documenting that language, the interesting thing that the translator told me, the translator himself is not from that community, but he speaks the language, and he speaks the language that I can understand, which is Odia. So he was there stationed for 15 years, so he learned the language, he sort of became part of them, and now when we were interviewing the Upper Bondas, who were supposed to be the native speakers of that language, were mixing Odia and their language a lot, whereas this guy, who is an Odia speaker, was speaking in pure Bonda. That was really fascinating, and that's also recorded as part of this documentary that I made. And those people were sort of target of the Western media, and a lot of foreigners, tourists came. A lot of people from the country also went there, and that became sort of a tourist spot for people to go and experience the Bonda way of living. So the government had to take a drastic step by stopping all the photography and videography for the foreigners for a considerable number of years. And they finally lifted that ban some years ago. But think about that, when they don't have their own media and they're portrayed by other people in the media, that's where they don't have the power on the media. And one thing that we try to do differently than most of the other documentary filmmakers is that we didn't ask them to speak in any other language. We didn't ask them to translate. So every single narrative is recorded in the native form. It's their voice, and then there is a subtitle. And I won't say that's the best way to do that, but that's probably the starting point where you give the voice to the people that they deserve. Because sometimes they don't have the power on technology, education, because they don't have education in their own language. They don't have the ability to afford the technology that is required to record a language or to share that with the outside world. They don't have the control over the media. They have no control over the governance, because there has been hardly one or two MLAs that has been elected from that community. And the moment that person got elected, he became someone else. He moved his base from the village to the state capital, got assimilated in the larger society, and probably forgot his own clan. That has happened to a lot of politicians, and unfortunately, they're not really the true representative of their own communities. So the decision making is always top down, even though it's democracy. We talk about multi-stakeholder model. We talked about that a lot in my previous job, but it's not really that. It's in reality, it's very much multilateral. Bunch of men mostly sit in a room and decide about something. They put out a public notice and then ask for public consultation. We really don't know how much of that public consultation goes into the actual policy making and get implemented in the real world. So I think the work that you do at DF is extremely important, because it's the totally opposite way of looking at things. You work with the communities and you get inputs from them and you implement that. And I think one thought I'd be leaving you all, because you all work with grassroots communities, is that the moment the decision making is made in a bottom-up way, meaning that you capture the narratives of the people and then translate that into policies and translate that into the actual work, rather than thinking of the majority, that changes everything. Because think of something that was made for the disabled people, right? Accessible practices. When you make, say, a toilet accessible, even a normal person who doesn't have any kind of disability can, not a normal, but someone who doesn't have any disability can use it, right? When you, say, make a design which has high contrast, a person who has no visibility issues can read it. But when the moment you make that, a person who has less visibility can easily read that, right? And that's all about being inclusive in your whole practice. When you create something looking at someone who is at the bottom of the pyramid, that is the job done, because everyone can use it, everyone has access to that. But the moment you create something that the most privileged person can use, then the least privileged person can never use that. And that's what is happening in all our work, particularly with languages. Because I don't value languages like many other people do, because for me it's still a tool. Language is still a tool, and that tool requires development, a developing process where you create technology, where you create, say, input tools. You make people use their smartphones to communicate in their own language. That's what is required. That's what is required for people to share information. A lot of you said in the beginning that language is all about sharing information between individuals, right? And if people are not enabled to do that, there's no way they will have any presence on the knowledge commons. Their information is always going to be skewed on the larger knowledge commons. And I think we as the educated society have a role to play there, because if we don't take that baby step today, many more languages will die, many more cultures will die, and we will become a homogeneous society in one day. That's for sure, because the process has already been started. We are building a lot of malls, and the day will come that we will only have those malls and nothing else, and we'll be buying the same kind of clothes from the same brands one day. So just look at things, and I started saying that you all know more than me, and I live with that thought that you all actually know a lot more than me. But just try to look at your work that you do with that lens, that if you build something for someone who is in the bottom of the pyramid, then someone who lives at the top of the pyramid would definitely be able to access that. During the census particularly, they ask people, what's your native language? Like you said, Kumaoni is a dialect. Many people said that their native language is, say, Hindi, but they actually spoke a different language at home, but they thought that's a dialect, because it's all put together as one umbrella, right? So the definition of language is different. So if you look at from a perspective of, say, someone who is not a linguist, but someone who understands what a language is and the diversity, it would be something like this, that anything that comes out of a human's mouth is a language, okay? It could be a sign language, it could be the language of a small kid, it could be the language of an old person, it could be anything that comes out of or anything that is expressive enough and distinct enough is a language. So I would actually put Kumaoni as a separate language, and Bhojpuri as a separate language, and many other dialects which are known as dialects as separate languages. So in that sense, India would have a few thousand languages, not just 780 languages.
I was writing one article and I found that there are 19,000 languages in India itself.
If you consider that diversity,
Yeah,
I think there is There's a saying in Hindi, I think, which says, कोस कोस में
नया language होता है.
बदले पानी, चार कोस में पानी, something like that, which basically means in like 12 kilometers there is a new language, right? And I think it's important to document that. I mean, technology has given us that wing to document languages, and the moment you're documenting languages, I don't know if you have watched that 2017 video of fake Obama video that was created by a researcher from University of Washington. It basically has 4 different videos of Obama. The voices were taken from recorded speeches, and then they used AI, deep learning, and that sort of technology to create fake videos. They look as original as you can imagine. Just go and watch this video. But think of the languages that are totally dead or almost extinct, and you can create media using technology like this to revive those languages, or just for people to experience. There is a particular museum, I'm forgetting the one, I think it's in Los Angeles, where they have recorded videos of the survivors of the Holocaust, and those videos are played in a holographic projection, so you can sit and experience how life was during Holocaust and what kind of trauma people went through. And think of India, right? We had partition, and there are so many survivors of the partition. And the moment you make young people aware of those things, it's a different experience altogether. And immersive storytelling, for example, could be used in many good ways. I mean, AI and deep learning have their bad side. You can create a lot of deep fake videos, for instance, right? You can put people into trauma by creating porn, for example, using their existing pictures on the internet. But think of the positive side, that so many languages could be revived, so many cultures could be brought into life just by using technology. And
but tell me one thing, isn't Wikipedia only in written format?
It is.
Yeah, so that itself is a barrier of documentation of oral languages.
It is in some ways, yes.
Yeah, because unless you write, and you
Yeah.
cannot write because
Yeah.
there is no script for
Yeah.
many oral languages,
Absolutely.
how do you document without
Yeah.
having it either audio or video or expressive?
Yeah.
So there is a limitation also, and I believe that the written medium has so overpowered with generation on humanity that we think only from the perspective of any language in terms of written, or the
Yeah.
knowledge in terms of written, or a wisdom in terms of written,
Yeah.
and the policy in terms of written,
Yeah.
that we are so biased with written that
Yeah.
we don't consider anything which is oral even
Exactly.
worth consideration.
And there is much more in oral, the oral history is so wide. The written thing would be literally hidden if you just open up the oral history.
And actually, if you really go into the science, oral means sound. Sound energy never dies, but the written will die. And sound energy, which is spoken even millions of years before, is there in the air. And if you figure
Yeah.
out the wave, you can capture the wave back, and you can you can put that into a museum or something. And you can say that 2000 years before, the people in the cave or wherever were speaking this language and this voice, because you can catch those waves, because wave never dies.
Yeah.
You know, but written will die. So from that perspective, written is such a perishable invention.
Absolutely. And it's more powerful when it's recorded in an oral or a sound and an audiovisual form, because as humans, our senses are designed to work better with anything that has audiovisual in it, right?
So my question is that can
Yeah.
we approach Wikipedia to start documenting oral language in oral before they die? Because it's important to not think in terms of 5,000 article of Santhali. Why can't we say 5,000 audio cast, or for that matter audio episodes or something like that of that language, is spoken.
So there is a website, I believe, where they are recording, audios, the sounds of the places. I don't know what it's called. So if you want to hear how Mumbai sounds like,
So that
you can,
Wikipedia
yeah.
also does. When
Yeah.
you open Wikipedia
Yeah.
of a certain page, they put language, they put local, they
Yeah.
put dialect, and there is a small audio clip there
That you can play.
Then you can play the national anthem of that language or something. There is some audio and one photo and one
Yeah.
small video is embedded in Wiki. But what I'm saying is that basically audio, visual, or oral technology used for oral language documentation
Yeah.
is more important to save
Absolutely.
that language
Absolutely.
and the culture than we think that we first create a script and then
Yeah.
write or then somebody translates and so on and so forth. That's basically.
Absolutely. So, to answer your question about why Wikipedia doesn't have anything that's oral, there's a long that's a long going ongoing debate inside the Wikipedia community. A friend and a mentor, his name is Achal Prabhala. He's a researcher based out of Bangalore, and he did a project called People Are Knowledge. And in that,
Our knowledge.
I think I'm vaguely remembering the name. I think it's called People Are Knowledge. There's a documentary and there's a research that they did. So him, a researcher from South Africa, of Indian descent, and then there was someone from Brazil as well. I'm forgetting these names, but their research was around this very question: why not Wikipedia? Why Wikipedia can't accommodate all those oral stories and oral history, particularly? So Wikipedia was started with a particular sort of set up rules, and some of those rules say that Wikipedia has to rely on something that is already published. So, for example, if you're writing an article about, say, one of these artifacts here, right, a Chanderi silk sari. So you have to rely on existing information that is reliable. So a journal or a newspaper or anything else that has some written publication about a particular notable topic. Now, if you look at the way India has documented, or this part of the world has documented its history, it's mostly oral, right? There's very little written, like published in published form. Until our missionaries came, we didn't have a sort of a very systematic form of writing. I mean, there were palm leaf manuscripts, there were stone inscriptions, there were copper plate inscriptions, and so on. But they were all very, disorganized in a manner. Now, if you look at the indigenous knowledge, for instance, it's mostly oral. My grandma died with some traditional medicinal practices that she used to perform. I'm not claiming that those are scientific, but I still feel that kind of oral knowledge has to be recorded. And I kept asking, can you tell me before you die? And she said, no, you're not eligible to receive that knowledge. You have to prove that you're eligible, and then only I'll share. So all of us grandkids or our parents could never receive that knowledge, whatever that knowledge was. So it died. That secret died with her, right? So that case is much more serious in an indigenous community. Some of the communities call them disaris. Disari basically is a doctor come priest come many other things in many indigenous communities, and they never share their secret recipes with the rest of the community. They think they are the only ones who have been chosen by the deities, and they are the only one to perform that. So they can't share that. It's sort of their violation of code of their code. And but coming back to the Wikipedia part, so Wikipedia has to rely on something that is already published. It cannot be the primary source of information. So Wikipedia, in that sense, so every language cannot have an encyclopedia, or if it has to have an encyclopedia, that has to be published first in some form, maybe written, maybe oral, maybe visual, but that has to be published elsewhere by someone else independently. Excuse me, and then that has to be cited using references on Wikipedia.
Typical,
Encyclopedic.
Capitalistic nature of the research-oriented kind of.
Yeah. Well, that's really sad. I mean, but there's also a project called Wikimedia Commons. It's a sister project of Wikipedia that allows people to contribute audiovisual and multimedia files, pictures, videos, audios, and that sort of things. I personally have contributed thousands of such stuff myself, and I think that's one way to contribute to one of the Wikimedia projects. So it goes to Wikimedia under an open license, openly available for the larger public for their use. They use their, for them to share and edit and also make commercial use at times. Sometimes it's tricky because if it's indigenous knowledge, some communities might have restrictions for not sharing something in a form that could be commercially used, because if you do that, then someone might make a rock song out of that and they might sell it without giving any royalty to the community. That has happened a lot, trust me. Disney and many other such big corporations have used indigenous knowledge and have sold them without giving any kind of royalty or even attribution to the communities.